You know, Mama told me, if we like, I was thinking about importance of appearance and how, while that's everywhere, it's especially in the South and still in Appalachia. And Mom called me right before I left. She said, now y'all have a good time and don't tell anything embarrassing about me, and I mean it.
Oh, God.
And I was like, I can't promise that. She was like, no, I mean it, Suzanne. I'm like, okay.
Okay, today we're talking with my friend Suzann. I've known Suzann for a long time, and we both share a great passion for Appalachia. So, Suzann, can you tell us maybe where you were born and tell us your name?
I am Suzann Moffett Ledford, and I was born in Murphy, North Carolina, in Providence Hospital, where the funeral home is now. Kind of two extremes right there. So the nuns delivered me there. The hospital's no longer there.
Yeah. Well, tell us about your life, about your family, your early life, what it was like.
My parents are Crandall Moffett and Joanne Moffett. She was a cross, and she's from Nantahala. I was born again in Murphy, and we lived down toward the Hiwassee Dam area. Daddy had been a teacher for a long time, and he was teaching. Well, he taught at Nantahala, and then he also taught different places and was at Martins Creek by the time I was born. So my brother, who was 8 years older, went to Hiwassee Dam, and I rode to school to Martins Creek with Dad, who was a teacher there. I remember him walking me into first grade, holding my hand the very first day.
So were your parents from, you said your mother was from Nantahala, so was your dad from this area too?
Yeah, he's from Hayesville. Yes, he grew up on Birch Cove Road in Shooting Creek area.
So by the time you were at Martins Creek, that's how we met, because that was the school that I went to. You actually would have went to a different school, but like you said, your dad was not just the teacher, he was the principal too.
Yes, he wound up, I got in trouble quite a bit.
Yeah. And he was my favorite teacher, just for the record, of all time. I feel like I learned more from him. And I loved all my teachers, but there was just something extra special about him. But so after you went through Martins Creek, then you went on to Hayesville to high school. You didn't go to Murphy where I went. You went back to Hayesville to your,
and that was
your
hard.
home school.
Yes. Yeah, so it was all pretty much new to me when I went to Hayesville, and so I missed my Martins Creek. Bunch of friends who went to Murphy, but I kept in touch. My best friend was from Martins Creek at the time, and I stayed with her quite a bit. But it was different, and even going from where we didn't have to change classes to high school where they changed classes and had something called homeroom, which at Martins Creek we just had homeroom.
Homeroom all day.
And recesses. We still had recesses. Yeah. So it was an adjustment.
Yeah. So I want to come back to education in a minute, but what about your grandparents? Were you close to them? Were they an influence on both sides? Or?
Yes. My grandparents, my Mama and Papa Moffett, Fred and Eula Moffett, Mama was an Eller, lived just right out the gravel road from us where we lived in Hayesville. And my Mama and Papa Cross, Fred and Ethel Cross, were from Nantahala. And so I got to stay with them. We went up there regularly, and I got to stay up there during the summer some. And I definitely impacted on both sides.
Did your family grow a garden when you were growing up, or your grandparents?
Both, yes, definitely. I still have memories of, I remember when it was a big ordeal when the corn was coming in, right? Because everybody had to work. And when I got old enough, my job was to silk the corn. And, Daddy always went to the garden, picked it, shucked it, got most of the silks off, really. Brought it in, and then I would silk it, and then Daddy and Mama would cut it off. And I always felt so grown up, or I felt grown up when I finally got to use the knife to try to, the butcher knife, right? Because it's a special butcher knife that you got to cut off the corn.
So today, do you still can or put up stuff?
Yes. The garden's a lot smaller than we used to. We do a raised bed garden, and I still miss the bigger garden. But yeah, love to can pickles. We love bread and butter pickles. We can those. Relish, strawberry jams, blackberry jams, my favorite. Grape jelly. So I do, because it really makes me feel close to my grandparents and my mom and dad.
So when you were growing up, what did you like to do for entertainment when you were young? What kind of...
I like climbing trees. I like getting into trouble. I had a beagle named Snoopy, and he was never taught. He would just do it. I would throw a rock, and he would run and look for the rock, and I would run and hide, and he would come find me. And that would entertain me for hours. Oh. I remember hiding in the doghouse one time and raising up because I heard something, and then I heard a crunch, and there was a wasp nest in his doghouse. But we did that, made mud pies with the neighbor kids. I try not to eat too many. And played in the creek a lot. What else? And I remember when I first discovered that rocks had little garnets. And then like the old gravel, remember when they used to just like scrape the gravel roads, and I would go and sit for hours and just looking at the rocks and finding the garnets. Then got a bike. But those were, I just loved it when I was at Nantahala when the grapes came in. Mom and I were just talking about that last night, that I would go. They had the best Concord grapes, and I would just lay. They had one vine that was really low, and I would just lay under the grapevine and just eat till I could pop.
So did your family or your grandparents, either one, have any like special traditions at Thanksgiving or at Christmas or birthdays or those kind of things?
Well, we mostly just cooking, of course, and eating. We spent a lot of Thanksgivings with my mamaw. Well, I guess they were kind of split. Both grandparents growing up, both sides. I remember, I have my grandparents' turkey platter, and on both sides. So those are special to me. I still remember those.
Yeah. So after you graduated high school, you went off to college, and what did you study?
I was going to, first, I thought I might want to teach, and I applied for a teaching scholarship, which I got, and then I decided I didn't want to teach. That was the last thing I wanted to do, because my dad was a teacher and a principal, my aunt was a teacher, my grandma was a teacher's aide. I come from a long line of teachers. I was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be a physical therapist. So I was able to go to Mars Hill, and about the second year, probably, I took organic chemistry. And I said, if God had wanted me to be a physical therapist, I would not be this unhappy. So I'd taken all my electives in English. And so I decided to switch my major to English education. I was going to be a high school English teacher.
So after you graduated, you ended up working at the local community college, Tri-County Community College. Actually was my teacher.
Yes.
Which was a funny turn of events there. And I remember, I don't know if you do, but one day your dad had to bring you something, and then he seen me, so he come in, and you like had to make him leave. He was like, I'll just stay. And you were like, no, you won't either. You're leaving. But anyway, in a weird turn of events, and then I worked at the college after that, after I was in Suzann's class. But so it's like we started out together, but then there we were again together all those years later, kind of like we'd spent so many days together at Marks Creek Elementary. Our elementary
Yes.
went through from kindergarten. I don't think they had kindergarten when you were there.
No, they didn't.
But, so for first grade through 8th grade anyway, we were together pretty much every day.
Yes.
And the school was so small. Suzann was a grade ahead of me, but a lot of times the classrooms would be split. So we were still even in the same classroom sometimes, but at least in the same school for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, so what do you tell us about Tri-County? How long have you taught there, and what do you teach?
I was hired there in 1993, and then hired full-time there in 1995. So it's been a while. It's hard to believe that I've been there that long. Over half my life, probably. Yeah. So I was hired, and when I first began, I started teaching English part-time and working in guided studies. So I tutored in English, math, and science. And then I just started teaching English and then branched off to communications. So I teach English and communications, American Lit. I also teach Southern Lit. We offer that sometimes. And communications, public speaking, relationship communications.
What's your favorite?
Southern Lit when I get to teach it, yeah.
You like, because you like books, you're a reader.
Yes.
Yeah, you like to read. So when you think about books about Appalachia, does a certain author, any authors come to mind that you think's authentic or that's really good or that people should check out? Even fiction, I mean, is what I was thinking about.
As we were talking about earlier, in my senior year at Morris Hill, I got to take Appalachian literature. And I didn't think that much about it, but I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. I mean, that's where I'm from, right? But when I took the class, I just couldn't believe when we started reading some of the stuff, nonfiction, some of the background stuff, that I just recognized, I could see myself in the literature. And so then the first book that really resonated with me like that was Lee Smith's Oral History. And I just fell in love. I just fell in love with all her stuff. I remember I was doing my student teaching, and my supervising teacher had to go on a writer's retreat. And she brought me back a Lee Smith. Lee Smith was at the writer's retreat, and she brought me back a signed copy from her. So, and that was my first, and that was in 1991. And the book is still good. I remember it uses a lot of folklore, and it's just still a good book. Ron Rash is another one that his writing just resonates. It's real easy. The sense of place in both those writers just resonates with me.
So earlier when Suzann and I were talking, you brought up an interesting point about sense of place. Can you kind of expound on that, what you were talking about the type of the prodigal son and the...
Oh, yes. Like one of the things that I talk about in Southern Lit, and it's also part of Appalachian literature, is that the prodigal son theme is almost an archetype now in Southern literature, because often as we grow up, we think, oh, it's so small, there's nothing to do, I just want to get out, I want to see the world. But then often what happens is that we get out, we see the world, and we go, oh, I just want to go back home, right? And we just want to go back, and those mountains all of a sudden, often, that seem to keep everything out when we were growing up, now feel very comforting and like they're holding you, in instead of keeping things out. And I think that's one reason why the prodigal son theme is so prevalent in Appalachian Lit and Southern literature.
For most Appalachians, that sense of place is huge.
Yes.
To the point that a lot of people can't leave. I mean, they never leave. They don't want to. Not that they should. I'm not saying
Right.
that, but they just can't. And then, like you said, a lot of people do. And maybe they find out they can't do it and they come back, or maybe they spend, you've heard so many people, I know, me and you both have in our lifetimes, where they just, as soon as I retire, I'm going home.
Right.
So they make their life somewhere else, but as soon as they retire and get the means, they come back.
Yes.
Come back home, even if it's 40 years later, they want to go back
Yes.
to that.
And I know a lot of people who, when they start having kids, they want to raise their kids here.
Yeah, to have a similar...
To have a sense of place, because not that there's anything wrong with living in the city. Just from my experience, and my observations, a sense of place is different. Being able to look around and see, oh, it's turning fall or it's spring, it's harder to do that with concrete buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that sense of belonging somehow
Yes.
is really tied to the Appalachian culture, both in the family, because family plays such a huge role, but also just in the landscape, belonging. Somehow
Yes.
the mountains and the deep dark hollers and the creeks and the fields and the pastures somehow just become part of who you are.
Yes, and that's reflected in the Appalachian literature, the details on the landscape, and I think it just goes hand in hand because, we feel, I know whenever I travel and I can go somewhere and go, oh, those mountains are beautiful, or this place is absolutely gorgeous, and it is, but there's nothing to me, like usually I'm coming up from Atlanta, right, if we've flown somewhere and we're coming up the road and I can see the mountains in the distance, and it almost every time I'm like, it's just a sigh of relief to see them. That's because you have roots there.
One interesting thing when I think about you, our friendship, like we said, the education place is all woven all through it, starting where we met at March Creek School. So, and then on to, we kind of separated in high school, but then come back together for many years at the college. But that's one thing often when people are talking about Appalachia, that it's like the lack of education. But I think we would both agree there's not a lack of education.
No, I don't think
there's
so.
educational opportunities available for people that want them. I mean, we had not just saying it because Mr. Moffitt was your dad, but I mean, when I went to high school and you went to high school, like you said, we may have faced the social changes of going to a bigger school and changing classes and that kind of thing. But as far as academics, I didn't face any. I wasn't
didn't either.
behind, or I fell right in with everybody else as far
Yes.
as that.
And I think, when I think about our class, I think that that's true for most of the students who went on from that class. And I'm sure others, but I'm just speaking from that one. I mean,
yeah. Which, of course, the high schools we went to were still in our general area and still in Appalachia. But it's funny that a lot of times it's almost like outsiders will paint Appalachia as a place that there's no colleges. Well then, I mean, you went to a college in Appalachia.
yes.
And graduated, and then you come back and taught at a different college
Right.
in Appalachia. And of course, those are not the only two. There's
Right.
there's a lot of colleges in Appalachia. Yeah. So that's like a stereotype that just is unfounded for sure.
It really is.
Yeah. And then of course there's the opportunity for people that we both know and our families and just friends and stuff for you to go outside of Appalachia, to go anywhere you
Yes.
want to, if you have the wherewithal and the academic standing to go anywhere you want to go, wherever the college is.
But I mean, the Appalachian area has, reputable colleges, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Appalachian State's known, Western Carolina, UNCA. We have, and there's many more. Berea, we were
Right,
talking about
yeah,
that earlier.
yeah.
And there's many more.
Yeah.
Lenore Run, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, well, they're reputable, good colleges.
Right. Yeah. So one thing Suzann and I always love to talk about is language. Yeah, we love to talk about the words
Yes.
and the sayings and our beautiful language, our colorful, rich, descriptive language. Yeah. So what are some of your favorite Appalachian words or phrases that come to mind?
I get so many from my mama because I send a lot to you, and she still comes out with some. I have never heard. She came out with one the other day. I may have sent it to you. I can't remember. But what are some of my favorites? He's standing around like a big-eyed boy at a picnic. I love that. It's just such a good visual to me. I love that. I'm trying to think of what I often say. Half the things I say, I don't know are Appalachian sayings. Yeah.
One of the ones that you've told me, sometimes your students, because sometimes you teach younger students as well, because probably common in other areas, but especially here, high school students are taking college
Yes.
courses now, so a lot of times you're teaching younger students. But sometimes they kind of misunderstand you or think
Yes.
you're saying something else.
Because it's a common saying for me to say, "Oh, I'm just ill," or something to that effect. And I remember a student sitting in the back stopped and raised her hand, and she's like, "So Miss Letford, in the South, ill can mean sick and mad?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's right."
What was the one time about the LOL or the lull? Yeah.
I said something about, because I handed out a test and it just got so quiet. And so I often have to fill that up. And I said, and a lull fell across the crowd. And a student stopped and looked at me and said, kind of like he felt sorry for me, and went, "Oh, Miss Ledford, are you trying to make LOL a word?"
Oh, gosh.
I'm like, no.
Yeah, which lull's not really Appalachian, but that's just a funny story. Yeah.
Now, I did tell a student that I wasn't, because I was taking up papers, and he was like, "Oh, Miss Ledford, mine's on my desk. Will you just grab it?" And I said, "I ain't your mama." And he never did understand that. And he goes, What? And I said, "I ain't your mama." And finally, another student turned around and said, "It means she didn't." "Oh, no, I am so sorry. I told that backwards. What I said was, I didn't take you to raise. And he stopped. He goes, I don't understand. And I said, I don't know how else to say it. I didn't take you to raise.
Yeah.
And he still didn't understand. And the other student turned around and said, it means she ain't your mama. And he understood. And he went and got his paper and turned it in.
We've talked about before some words that we didn't, me and you, since we were raised very similar in a similar area or really close together, that we didn't realize were not real words. Like I say, wasper, and I didn't know that wasn't a real word until I was grown. But there's some other ones that we were talking about.
Yes, I didn't know until I was grown that I'd grown up with the word tedious, meaning it's real. It's another word. That's how we pronounce tedious. Right? That it's just small and, painstakingly detailed. It's just tedious. And I still let that slip every once in a while. That's just tedious work.
Yeah.
And heathern's another one. I grew up thinking it was heathen and it was heathen. And the first time I read that, I was prepping for a class. And I was like, they spelled heathen wrong. They left out the R. It must be a typo. And then I went and looked it up and went, oh, that would be wrong. Skift was the other one that we talked about. A skift of snow.
Yeah. So since you are around younger students fairly often, well, not during COVID, but during normal times, do you think our language is dying, or do you hear some younger students still using it, or what do you think?
I hear some of them, but not a lot. The last couple of years, I haven't heard it as much, and that always saddens me, which makes me extra thankful for the work that you do.
Well, thank you for that. What about with your older regular college population students? Do you hear it more often?
I do. I do, especially from local residents. Yeah. I do still hear it, and which is nice, especially in like the 30-year-olds. I still hear it quite a bit.
So when you think about your life in Appalachia, what are the things you'd like to celebrate?
So much heritage. Those words are pretty synonymous with me, as Appalachian and heritage. And I think at the times, the things that my grandparents have taught me, my grandmother taught me how to sew, although I'm not good. But I can hand sew, right? And hand quilt a little bit. She taught me to cook. The very first egg I ever made was I scrambled an egg. She brought me a little stool and on the stove, and I remember scrambling an egg and feeling so big. So every time I cook, because I do love to cook and I love to can, and Mama and Daddy taught me how to can. I learned by watching them, listening to them, calling Mom and asking her about things, gardening. So it does have a lot to do with food and heritage and putting that to use. Alice Walker wrote a great short story about that, everyday use, and it's how do you honor your heritage. And, I love putting my quilts up on display, but there are times I think, they were made to be used, so it's hard. So I try to do a balance. There are things, I think about the things that they taught me, and I want to honor that and my Appalachian heritage by teaching others, and just utilizing that.